One of the things that COVID-19 has brought to 2020 is a lot more of anxiety and depression. At the moment, a lot of teenagers are really doing it hard because they don't necessarily have the skills or the tools to deal with anxiety. On today's show, we're going to be speaking to an expert who works with teenagers and helps them see the light. Hi, welcome to the Secret Men's Business Podcast. This is Joey Buzzardville. On today's show, we're going to be speaking to Dean Mc Caughan, and he works at Headspace, and he's going to be telling us about how he treats teenagers with anxiety. Hey, Dean, how are you?
Yeah, good, Joe. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you. I know suicide prevention is a big part of our group, and so I have to say thank you for talking because I've been really wanting to talk to someone about what's been happening in the environment at the moment and how suicide prevention is being a key part of that. So, before we start, do you want to just give the audience a bit of an introduction to you and what you do at your job?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Look, a bit about me. The current work that I'm in is I work for Headspace, where I've been for the last 2.5 years. I'm the services manager, so I oversee all of the operational and clinical governance of all of my Headspace centres. I've got 4 of them in the southeast Melbourne area. I've sort of got 20 years experience, I guess, Joe, working in clinical mental health settings, having worked for sort of 2 main hospital providers previously, sort of specialising in child and youth, but I've worked in a range of different mental health settings, from adult, acute, aged person's mental health. I found myself in for a period of time, but yeah, probably about 3/4 of my career has been in the child and youth space. I'm a mental health nurse by background, and so I'm comprehensively trained, and I guess, maybe a couple of other key things. I've got young kids myself, so I sort of appreciate the gig of being a parent and being a dad, and
Dean,
passionate.
you look so young, Dean. you've got a young face, so it's good that you've got a family. Because I actually thought that you were like 22 or something, but you're actually yeah. So what you mentioned a lot of mental health stuff. Like, what was the calling for you? Why did you actually want to do that? Was it a personal experience, or did you just feel that that was where you were sort of experienced in, and that's where you went?
Yeah, when I did my nursing, Joe, I guess I was weighing up a few different things, whether I would do sort of paediatric care or whether I'd get into mental health. The thing I've always liked about mental health is that I've always enjoyed talking with people, and I consider myself a pretty relational person. So I've enjoyed the fact that I was often fascinated when I was doing nursing about how could some people with the same type of difficulties recover at different rates, and obviously, their coping mechanisms and how they managed. And you'd see people with trauma all around the world. And I got really fascinated by, resilience work, and the work of some of the sort of recovery and trauma specialists, thinking about how is it that some people can recover quickly, more quicker than others, I guess. And I got fascinated with how the mind worked and some of the biology. And for me, sort of moving into mental health was a natural next step, and I've enjoyed it ever since.
So I'm curious now. So did you actually discover what that answer was? Do you sort of know why people? Because actually, I was on a podcast this morning as a guest, and that was our topic. And why is it that some people can actually I personally embraced COVID. I didn't have a problem. Well, a lot of people I know hated it. So, what do you think is the reason why some people are able to get through problems in life, while other people, I don't like using the word victim, but they become stuck in the problem?
Yeah, it is. I guess it's a intricate combination of reasons. I guess I think for me, it essentially comes down to I sort of had this poster that often was up in my office, which was, change your thoughts and change your world. I often think that how we see the world is a big part of that. And obviously there's different influences to that as well. But that's the other thing with the work with mental health. There's a lot of hope, because there's a lot of effective strategies that we have to help people just start changing their focus, and for me, I think it's around when you see people that have got perhaps more resilience, when you've got people that have got that ability to rise to manage everyday, sort of obstacles and stresses and things like that. I guess they're drawing on their experience of how do they manage their thoughts, how do they manage and develop strategies, and how do they keep connected? How do they keep connected with others? I think it's hard, isn't it, Joe, when we try and do it all alone,
Yeah, well, that's the thing about why I think talking to you is so important, because I totally agree and love what you're talking about as an adult. But with with teenagers, they may not have the experience or the exposure to what you're talking about. So that's the first step. But what do you think are the main prominent issues that young people are going through? What are the things that you're noticing that they're presenting with?
Yeah, look, range of things, Joe. Sort of really for us is issues with Headspace looks really cares for young people with mild to moderate difficulty, so that high prevalence issues such as mood, anxiety difficulties. We see a lot of young people questioning gender and sexual identity, essentially family discord for people, people with lots of sort of difficulty trying to fit in and manage within the family setting. Culture and individuation, I think, is really important for young people, trying to make sense of how, themselves and their own sense of emerging adulthood, and how they're going to maybe do things different from the family. I guess people are forming their own relationships as well, and as we know, particularly for the younger people, that as they're moving away from the family unit and individuating and forming their own relationships, that's sometimes a really difficult time for people as well. And we sometimes see social issues such as bullying being a prominent issue with our young people coming from the school settings and so on. To be honest with you, the school refusal phenomenon is huge, particularly out where I am. The school reluctance and the school refusal is continuing to increase. And
refusal to help? Is that what you mean?
Well, refusing to attend school. Yeah.
Oh, so okay. They're not going to school,
attendance,
right.
I guess. Yeah. So they're
wow.
not getting to school, a reluctance and refusing to actually leave home and get to school. And, there's some statistics regionally of, up to 30% of all from the school, 30% of the school is disengaged, chronically disengaged from actually attending.
Yeah.
Body image issues are big at the moment as well, Joe. So a sort of emergence of young people with eating disorders, more and more young people with eating disorders as well. And with COVID, obviously there's been some unique set of challenges for young people as well, the sense of loss, disconnect and worry. That loss is, for young people, can be around some of those everyday events, like I didn't get to, play my footy season, I didn't get to do the schoolies like it would have intended, my graduation. So they're suffering a lot of a loss. The disconnect was evident with school, between being at home, remote learning, and getting back at school, and with sport and social activities cancelled. And a lot of worry for people as well about infection, worry about family, and I think more of that generalised anxiety has been quite increased as well.
Yeah, and so out of all those sort of issues, how much of that do you feel trickles over into people wanting to end their life? Like, do you see a lot of people that want to do that?
We certainly do. And I guess there's sort of a spectrum of where people sit within that. Sometimes for people it might be more of a hopelessness, that things feel really tough, really tight, really difficult, and there might be fleeting thoughts of suicide, through to people that are pretty high risk, Joe, that they're right at that end of spectrum where maybe for them suicide, they're contemplating suicide as an option to end pain, or that emotional pain that they're experiencing.
Yeah. So again, I'm just a little bit curious about. I've sort of got this observation that when we were growing up, like I know I'm a lot older than you, but when we were growing up, life was a bit different. We were given. I personally was given a lot of resources because I had to go work at 13. My parents were very sort of like they sort of did nothing. They didn't solve any of my problems. Well, as the new generation came through, there's an observation that they were given a lot of things, right? It was a lot easier. So what do you think that they're lacking? And I don't say that in a disrespectful way, but what emotional tools are they not really connected with because they weren't given them, or they weren't taught them?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, Joe? Because I sort of think there's a range of differences now, isn't there? Like when you think about what young people are experiencing now, we see rates of family discord, family violence, parental separation. I really think that and it's certainly not in a judgment or within a family line as well. As certainly being a father myself, I know the challenges, but I certainly, that family discord, I think, is a huge thing. We get large numbers of family coming to us for help because their family, they're struggling to communicate with their young person. They're there, there's sort of lots of blockages in that system. Maybe there's been sort of trauma within the family unit as well, and we certainly see increased rates of that within the family. I think that's one part of it. I think the other part.
I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, but like, that also would impact the fact that those kids aren't going to school. Like, there seems to be this what would you call it, like entitlement that they can make decisions. Well, again, when I think about my childhood and my teenage years, like we wouldn't have done that. So, again, is that part of it? Like that they're just more empowered and the parents give them that power. And so now we find ourselves in a place where they don't know how to manage that.
Yeah, look, I certainly think, Joe, a lot of the families that I've worked with, they say that, these days it feels like for parents that it is hard to parent. It does feel like there's technology, there's, there are so many things online. There's it feels like young people are growing up quicker, that they tell us that, that their access to information for teenagers and young people is through the roof. The information that perhaps we received growing up versus what the young people have access to now is through the roof. And I think we have there's a lot of, I guess, emerging research around emotional development, and I think we get a lot of young people now that are pretty intelligent in a range of issues to do with access to information and things. But I don't know if maturity is necessarily still there as well.
Yeah. I mean, like it is. It's interesting how you're right. It's like they have access to everything, which is a good thing because we want to move forward. But, I don't think we've fully acknowledged how it's impacting. Like, for example, if you're talking about body image before, and now we're probably realizing that Instagram and Facebook and all that causes these things. So there's a problem with, I guess, parents trying to get their kids off it because kids don't want to get off it. It's a really big problem. It's a big thing.
It is, isn't it, Joe? Look, I think the other thing, I guess this is in the camp of flying the flag for young people as well, that, I think, within school, within, sporting clubs, we're taught more and more to speak about feelings now as well. And so young people are speaking about feelings, which I think is a wonderful thing, which is a really good thing. I don't think necessarily, growing up, Joe, you and I, we might not have had that same level. It might have been you sort of just get on with things and away you go. And maybe our difficulties came out in different ways. But I guess young people are now being encouraged to talk about things and think about things. And I don't know if necessarily we've all caught up with how do you manage that in families as well? How do you manage that young guy that is got a lot of emotion, and how do you manage that and when it might come out as anger, for example, and with a young, working with a young man who's trying to make sense of what he even is feeling in the first instance,
Yeah, and I guess that's that's good because really you're sort of normalizing it a little bit because there was a fear. I have a fear. I do still, and I have to work on it. But because I don't have enough exposure to young people. Before COVID, I found it easier to talk to them. Now it's like there's a lot of stuff that they're going through. But I think, do you think in essence it's just that they want to be heard?
Yeah, look, I think so, Joe. Look, we at Headspace, we've got a youth advisory committee. So it's a committee made up of young people. And we've got some pretty bright young people that help give us some direction and guidance around how to set up the centres and so on. But one thing they've got great ideas, they've got great energy, great ideas, and, a bit of mentoring and modelling around them. But, that's one thing, I guess. It's sort of trying to harness that energy that young people have and, I guess, putting it into a practical application. And that's sort of the help we try to give them.
Yeah, and also, I guess, even just talking to you now, how we can easily get consumed in what they're doing that we don't like or it's wrong. I think that we need to respect the fact that they're going through something and give them that space and just listen and just be part of that rather than, because I do know a lot of teenagers get a lot of flack from people saying get up and do something or whatever when we don't really appreciate that they may be going through mental health. I wanted to ask you, do you feel that there's a difference between male and female teenagers, how they deal with things? Because this is a predominantly male podcast. So, have you noticed a difference, or are you feeling that teenagers in general are going through similar things?
Yeah, I think it is different, Joe. Generally, in my experience working within the sector, usually it's many more young people identifying as female that will come forward. So it's sort of normally about 60% maybe female, and 60-40 sort of mix is what I tend to see. So we see more young women coming to access help and less less young males. And so, we're seeing that males don't access maybe the services as frequently. In terms of that, I guess I'm thinking maybe for males, I've sort of thought about this a bit in working with young men, that perhaps it is a little bit more difficult to express their emotions, and maybe helpers find it more difficult sort of helping them manage their emotions. So what I mean by that, I guess, is that from a young age, young boys seem to be more prone to bottle emotions up, maybe a little bit more. Maybe they don't learn to label emotions as such. And maybe, we sometimes give messages at times, don't we, like, don't be a sook, or man up, toughen up. And so maybe it feels like, as a young guy, maybe there's certain emotions we don't feel comfortable. And so this is where I think sometimes, like with anger, we sometimes might see more anger through young men. And I often talk about this with the young guys and with families as, anger can be a really good bodyguard, and almost the metaphor of anger as a bodyguard for that maybe sadness or maybe worry. And maybe that's the thing that comes through. And so we might see the bodyguard more often with young men, because it doesn't feel safe to show those other emotions. And so in turn, I guess the expression of anger is their way of letting some of the emotions out that they've got going on for them. But not everyone feels comfortable, I guess, to manage that emotion of anger. So when you're the helper, when you're the parent, or you're the person trying to help, sometimes you're told, calm down, go to timeout, move yourself away from society. And so I think these are some of the factors that sort of happen there. And I guess managing big feelings by themselves is really hard. Maybe they've got limited opportunities as they're growing up in those teenage years to be co-regulated or have those helpers.
I mean, I think girls are sort of encouraged to sit around and talk about how they're feeling. But you're right, guys are not. I mean, I know it's changing. It's definitely changing. I mean, you probably would have heard about that documentary. It's called The Masks That We Wear.
Yes,
yeah. Like, I really think that every male should see that. It's because it really encourages you to be comfortable to talk to your friends. Because if you can't talk to your friends, then you are going to bottle it up, and that could lead to doing something that's going to harm you. So I mean, what do you think? Going on what you were just saying, what do you think parents should be doing, or what would be something that you would encourage them to maybe start opening up to in regards to dealing with, say, teens that are not motivated or feeling a bit melancholy?
Yeah, look, I think the communication's the biggest thing, Joe. A lot of the families that come in and see us, for example, there's been some kind of maybe rupture with that, with the communication, and it's maybe gets to the point where A and B are struggling to talk to one another or hear one another and so on. And I think, just as we were saying that last point, I think to be able to open up and be curious around, what's the function of that behaviour, be curious about it, what's the unmet need of that young person, and how can we help them get that need met in an appropriate, effective way. And, I think for young guys as well, what I've learned over the journey is that sometimes we just have to do it differently. I'm not always sitting in a room staring back at a young guy. I might be doing an activity, shooting some hoops. I might be talking about other things, and some of the emotional stuff comes in on it. So I think sometimes as well we have to just be, perhaps mindful how that's being delivered. I was saying the other day to my community engagement team, why is it that we don't have many young men following us on social media? And we were thinking about, does that feel okay for a young man to like a mental health organisation, or does that feel like that's stigmatizing, or someone's going to call me out for that?
Yeah,
how do you engage?
I think that because we've got a big following on the men's group, but you're right. Like, I actually thought about that. Like, I want younger guys, but I've noticed, I went in there and did an analysis, and it's 30 plus. So it's sort of like 20 and below don't come, or if they do join, they leave because they feel like they probably don't have the space to talk the way we're talking, or they don't care about that. Like, they sort of maybe, again, been brought up to believe that mental health is a problem. And that's, it's going to take a while for that to change, because as more footballers and athletes and actors come out as being depressed, it normalizes it. And I think it's just taken a long time for men to actually be heard, because we don't normally consider men to be anxious or depressed. So, can I just ask, I'm not sure if you know about how to handle the parent side, but what if there's no shift? What if the parents have got their kids at home and they're not going to school, they're not getting off the couch, they're not showering, they're not doing anything, they're not listening, and they're just being abused or yelled at? What would you suggest for the parents to do in that situation?
Yeah, look, what I often say in that situation, Joe, is that sometimes if the young person themselves, so I guess we stay, what stage of change is the person at? Are they pre-contemplating? No, there's no problem within me. It's all you. You know, it's all over there.
Well, it could just be that they're just feeling a bit depressed. And so rather than trying to work on it, they've just become lazy and they're just expected to do nothing. But their parents also have a life, right? They also have a home. But it's like, sometimes, like, for example, say the son is staying home and just playing video games in the lounge room all day. And
Yep.
there sort of seems to be no way to get them off the couch. So it's like the parents seem trapped.
Yeah, it is, and very much what you're describing, Joe, is that I often think work with young people under the age of 18 is so family based. You know,
Right.
it's a chip away, and is it stuff that has been, is there sort of family rules that have been in place for some time, and there's more entrenched behaviour and expectations, or is this new behaviour? And I guess for some of those families where they've been stuck in this situation for quite a while, it's just chipping away one bit at a time. It's for the parents of, what are your ground rules? What are you setting up with your young? And these are, whether young men
Mm.
perhaps at home. What are your ground rules and what are your consequences for that? But it's sometimes easy to fall into the trap of everything's a consequence rather than what is going to be some of the other side of things. What are the positive rewards? And actually, rather than everything just being the stick, it's also the other end,
Yeah.
which is
I
coming
mean,
out.
it's so interesting how, because you are in that field, and I don't mean to organically go to the bad things, but it's good that you're talking and making us realize that we need to focus also on the positives, because I mean that I really do feel for teenagers, because there seems to be a stigma around what they're doing wrong, but there doesn't seem to be enough conversation about
Yeah.
what they're
Yep.
doing and what they're going
Yep.
through. You know what I mean? So
I think
do
so.
you think that will change?
Look, I think so, Joe. In that example of your gamer, let's put it through this eyes for a minute. Let's say your gamer is there or online, and let's imagine that they haven't felt comfortable to talk for whatever reason to talk about how sad or depressed they're feeling, and maybe what they've learned is numb yourself or take yourself away. An object can soothe you, and it can be a game, and that's become your number one coping mechanism. I'm
Right.
often a big believer, if you're going to take away someone's coping mechanisms, you need to replace it with something. So just to
Yeah.
say that's been your lifeline or that's been your primary coping mechanism, and now we're going to pull it away cold turkey, there's going to be some difficulties with that, and sometimes you see aggression come through with that, or you get sort of family issues that way. I think it's around going back to that point of what's the functionality of behaviour. How can we help equip this young person to have some other skills? And sometimes the family need help with that, because sometimes just the very fact that you're the father or the mother of the child, you're sort of sacked as the manager. As the young person's growing up, they sack you, and you might, if you're lucky, be hired as a consultant.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I mean, it's pretty tough, isn't it, for parents? Like, and like, my concern is when they don't shift, when they don't want to listen. And again, I can only boil it down to the fact that as we progressed in society, some of those things like for example, eating together or being home at a particular time, the respect sort of got chipped away. And so now here we are in a situation where we're trying to bring respect, but yet they've always had that freedom. So it is a negotiation of trying to change things, isn't it?
yeah, it is, and you're exactly right. I think it's looking at, if you're going to make some big scale family changes, it's looking at, okay, what are the things that we want to make the priority? What are the things that we want to slowly start getting some realigned expectations around, and try to be as consistent with that? I think generally speaking, young people do pretty well with predictability and consistency. And part of adolescence is, I want to test out that boundary. I want to see, do you mean it? Is that what's going to happen? What's the thing? And it's hard. And I think whilst you're re-establishing boundaries in the family, it's a hard time. I often say to family, you've got to call on your own support system as well. You've got to have your own debrief with your mates or with whoever else, and come in for some counselling to sort of get the game plan sorted. And for some young people that won't come and see us at Headspace, we'll do work with the parents,
Yeah.
and then the parent will go back into that family, and we'll sort of chip away that way. But you're right. It can be it's something that takes some time, I guess. And it's, rather than feeling overwhelmed that you're not getting those changes, I think you've got to break it to small goals and feel more hopeful about achieving those.
Yeah. Like, do you feel that there's been an increase in your clients because of what's happening this year? Or
Yeah, there has been. Yeah, there has been, Joe. So I think across the board, from the national network, we're hearing a lot of families, a lot of young people reaching out for that support, and they're telling us that probably it'll be early into next year we'll see more peaking of that. In many regards, they're feeling we're not even at the peak yet. So it was probably more recently. I did a forum with Patrick McCaughan and a few others, a few local MPs, a few months ago, and just talking about this very topic and these experiences. And young people were actually at that forum saying, look, why are we only talking about the mental health side of COVID now? We've talked about hand washing, we've talked about masks,
yeah.
and I'm sort of not critical of government at all. I think they've done a great job managing everything. But I think they're right. I think, there's very needed conversation about mental health and mental well-being as a part of this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I don't think we've seen the peak, and like my practice it's tripled. I think this is the hardest I've ever worked in the 15 years I've been a therapist. So, and you sort of think, why is this happening? It's all because of certain people not being able to deal or cope with the change. I'll ask you one last question because I know you're a really busy man. So what advice or what sort of like ideology would you give people, friends, parents, teachers about acknowledging or noticing that someone may be suicidal, a teenager may be suicidal? Like, what are some of the things that they should look out for, and what are some of the things that you suggest that they do?
Yeah, Joe, the thing that I often think about is, have they noticed any changes in the young person? So behavioural change, I think. So whether that might be withdrawal, they're noticing the young person's withdrawal, maybe they're appearing more depressed or sad, maybe they've cut themselves away from activities that they used to enjoy. I guess is some of those telltale signs as well. And look, what I would suggest is that if you are seeing those changes with young people, if you're seeing an increase of distress, we know with young people as well, if they're not connected, if they're more distressed, if they're experiencing these mental health sort of concerns, I think it's really important to ask them about it. Keep an open dialogue as much as you can. Keep that connection, even if the young person tells you, to get whatever. I think just the fact that they've noticed that you've been attuned to that, I think is really important, and keep chipping away at that. Sometimes that might be actually getting that help, Joe. So, contacting a place like Headspace, and on our websites with, Headspace National, we've got all of the local centre numbers as well. But on top of that, I guess you've got, council running really good programs. You've got our tertiary, our hospital setting that's providing more acute care for people as well. I think keeping an eye on how young people are going, asking them about that, I think is really important.
Yeah, because like I heard recently that a 13-year-old boy committed suicide, and it sort of broke my heart because I just think they're only 13, and for them to think that, it must be really bad, or they must feel really a lot of pain to think that their life can't go on beyond being 13. So so it's good. You're doing a great job, and thank you again for talking to us. And I'm going to put all your numbers and information in the podcast below, so if any young people are listening, or even parents, they will have access to that. So, Jane, thank you so much for taking the time and being part of our Secret Men's Business podcast today.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
That's okay. You've been listening to the Secret Men's Business podcast. It's out on Monday and Thursdays at 9 a.m. Now, don't forget to click the bell below and subscribe so you get notified of all our podcasts. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you soon. Bye.